It's Premier League predictions time for the 24-25 season. We are nearly at the beginning of another top flight season, and I think there's a lot to delve into here. Now, to lay out some ground rules, I'm not going to be predicting every single position in the Premier League table. I think that becomes a little bit dull, a little bit irrelevant when we get into positions, especially around mid-table, where is there much of a difference between finishing 9th or like 14th? I mean, really, we're going to talk about the serious stuff in this show. We're going to be talking about who's going to win the Premier League title, the top 4/5 if England are good enough to get 5th place as a Champions League spot, the top 7 effectively, and then we'll look at relegation. And I also want to give kind of my surprise dark horse team that I will be watching this season, and I think based off their summer business, based on what they've done in recent times, I think could be maybe a team that surprises a few. So we're going to look at all of that. Please do give me your predictions in the comments below, whether you agree, disagree. And yes, you can see behind me, you know the title of this channel, we're Chelsea biased here. So obviously I'm going to be try and be more positive than negative about Chelsea, but still give as objective and kind of unbiased as I can views about other teams as well. So let's start off with the top of the league. I feel that Man City will still win the Premier League, purely based on muscle memory, purely based on having the best squad, purely based on having the best manager. I think until Pep Guardiola decides to leave, which could be at the end of this season, it's going to be very difficult to topple them. Now, I do think there are and is only one serious contender to Pep Guardiola's crown, and that, of course, is Arsenal. Despite maybe not getting the centre forward they really need this summer, that's still a huge question mark over them. Who is going to provide those goals over the course of a season to rival, say, Erling Haaland? Yes, they did score a ton of goals, I believe over 90 last season, and they got very close to winning the Premier League title. They have been up there, they have shown their consistency, and that experience, of course, being in a title race and winning as many games as they have is obviously going to stand them in good stead. And we saw with Liverpool, despite missing out a couple of times, eventually did win the Premier League title. I still think they lack that big goal scorer, someone who is going to guarantee them a certain number of goals. Can Kai Havertz be that player? Can Gabriel Jesus stay fit enough across the season? Can Bukayo Saka improve on his numbers, despite the fact that it feels like at times he is being asked to do a lot and maybe gets exhausted by the end of the season? They have signed Calafiori, of course, from Bologna, who I think is a decent signing. I really do, and I think obviously from a left-sided defence point of view will strengthen that area for them. But really, still, I just, you never want to bet against Man City. I think they prove doubters wrong every single year, despite having doubters, even though how much they've won in the Premier League is a little bit ridiculous at this point. And Pep has such a firm grip on that squad, has such a firm grip on how to win a Premier League title. Even if they start the season a little bit rocky, which they usually do, I think people get far too swayed into thinking they're going to drop off, and then it hits Christmas, it hits February, March time, and they ramp up and win the Premier League. The only way I can see this stopping is if Haaland and Rodri get significant injuries. I think that was the thing that hurt them when Liverpool won the Premier League title recently. Rodri especially, maybe Man City don't quite have someone who can fill his shoes. I think actually losing Rodri is more detrimental than losing Haaland, as ridiculous as that may sound. I think Rodri plays such a key role, not only in scoring some big goals, but just obviously adding that stability, that aggression to central midfield, and that kind of composure that Pep obviously needs. So if they lose him for a sustained period of time, they could massively drop off, or at least create the space that gives Arsenal the chance to win the Premier League. So Man City, Arsenal, the top two. Under the top two, I do think it is slightly up for grabs. I think there is a lot of teams that could find themselves in the top four purely because there's so much chaos below the top two in terms of changing coaches, changing ownership, the introduction of Champions League football for some teams, but also the lack of European football for some teams, which could help them. I've gone with Liverpool, and this may be the most boring answer. Arne Slot obviously is a new coach, and he's taking over from Jurgen Klopp, and we've seen this before in recent times. And I know this isn't in terms of length, but in the modern era, the length of time that Klopp was at Liverpool is very long, given how much we see coaches change. We saw the massive drop-off when Sir Alex Ferguson left Manchester United. I think a more recent comparison is maybe Arsene Wenger, even though, of course, he struggled in his latter years. Him leaving that club still left a bit of a shadow and took some time to kind of get through. I think it will be the same for Liverpool, but the thing that gives me belief that Liverpool will still be in the top four, or maybe at times feeling like they could still challenge, is just the quality of player they still possess. I think Mo Salah, even though he's a little bit older now, he's still going to be scoring goals. I think he's guaranteed at least 20 goals. Gakpo, I think, can only grow as a player. I think he obviously had a really strong Euros. I think he's someone that could prove to be an even better Premier League forward. Jota, Diaz, Szoboszlai, Alexander-Arnold, Van Dijk. The list goes on of players still at a high level for Liverpool who I just think on paper look like pretty good players. And I think something's going to have to go drastically wrong for them to be a disastrous season. It might not be an amazing season. There may be significant dips, but I just think that quality over the course of the year will see them through. Maybe they won't win anything, but I think that it will still be a acceptable first season given how it is a daunting task to replace Jurgen Klopp at Anfield. So I think Slot will get them Champions League football. Fourth, I've gone with Newcastle. Yes, this may be my most wild take of the video, but the reason I've gone with them is purely because they don't have European football. I think that energy that really sapped Eddie Howe's style of play last year was really detrimental. And of course, they had some good nights in the Champions League and maybe were a little bit hard done by to not qualify from the group stage. But I think no Europe. The signing of Mark Guehi, I think, is a brilliant addition to their squad in defence. You've still got some brilliant players in that squad. They actually haven't had the coal of big players that I think some people feared they would, where they'd lose their best assets. They haven't. They still have Anthony Gordon, who is a brilliant left winger. They've still obviously got Alexander Isak, who still is a young forward, but is someone who's already scoring a significant number of goals in the Premier League, and I think will continue to do so. Bruno Guimaraes, of course, is still there. Eddie Howe, I think, is a brilliant coach, and I think it's smart of him to not take the England job right now, because I still think there is something to achieve with Newcastle. And because of that lack of game time, we saw it the season before last when they did qualify for the Champions League, how that intensity can really be a big factor for them. So I think that will help Eddie Howe. Obviously, that becomes a bigger challenge if they get back into Europe and managing both of that. But I feel they have a strong enough squad to hurt teams, and maybe like Aston Villa could actually shock a few and get into the top four. Fifth, and this may be where my bias has come in, Chelsea. My hope, the positive about Chelsea is, and the thing that's given me some hope is they do have some quality players. There's kind of undeniable things about that, and the true ceiling of the current Chelsea squad, despite my feelings about the structure of the club, the ownership of the club, which you cannot underrate, ignore, they're relevant, but we talk about that on this show to death. So to speak about Chelsea in a more positive way, Cole Palmer, Christopher Nkunku, I think, are two exceptional players that if stay fit and are in form and work for Maresca, just work for whoever is the Chelsea coach, I think will make Chelsea a more threatening team. Nicholas Jackson had a really promising first season, and I think if he is given the time again, he could go to new heights. I think Chelsea obviously have some real talent across this squad. If Enzo Fernandez clicks, he could become a brilliant midfielder. Moises Caicedo, I thought, had ended the season really strongly. I think players like Noni Madueke on their day can maybe grow a little bit more. Reece James is obviously an exceptional footballer if he stays fit and if he avoids more suspensions. I think Levi Colwell, Wesley Fofana could get better. Malo Gusto too. Let's see if Marc Cucurella can continue his good Euros form at Chelsea. The big factor here is obviously strength of squad. The fact that the squad has been weakened by the loss of Conor Gallagher, potentially the loss of Trevor Chalobah, one of the squad's strongest defenders last year, and of course Enzo Maresca stepping up to the Premier League, and I think a style of play that has some severe risks to it. So I could see Chelsea be as bad as they have been in recent years and drop below the top 7, and maybe have, likely in that scenario, would have a change of head coach. But the pressure is on Maresca, the pressure is on Chelsea. They need Champions League football. Fifth may or may not get them Champions League football, but I can't honestly say it's going to be an incredible season. I can see it going drastically wrong very quickly, but I think there is objectively good talent, so you think maybe that will win out in the end, and the Conference League will give Maresca a chance potentially to win a piece of silverware. So God knows what happens with Chelsea this year, and I'm a Chelsea fan and I'm supposed to know this stuff, but I think if you ask any Chelsea fan and they honestly tell you and feel like they've got like severe clarity over where Chelsea are going to end up this year, I think maybe they're fooling themselves a little bit. It's not to say that they won't be proven right, but I think there's an equal chance of them being proven wrong because of the chaos that has been around Chelsea and the mood not being good heading into the season. But let's be hopeful, let's be positive, let's feel like Chelsea could do something good this season. So I've put them fifth. Sixth is Man United, and I think Man United and Chelsea in recent years have kind of been a parallel of each other in different ways. Yes, Ineos have come in, and yes, there's a lot of positivity about Dan Ashworth There's a lot of positivity about Ruud van Nistelrooy. There's a lot of positivity about maybe some semblance of coherent structure behind the scenes. But I still think Ten Hag's problems are severe. I think structurally, he's got some big questions to answer. Yes, he ended the season with an FA Cup. He surprised a lot of people with winning a piece of silverware. But still, injuries persist. I mean, the new signing, Lenny Euro, is already out for a couple months. That's going to be something that both Chelsea and United are going to have to deal with. But on top of that, I think defensive midfield, the structure and the lack of it between defence and midfield is such a big problem for Man United. And if Man United if Ten Hag can't severely improve that area of the pitch, I think Man United will be exposed once again, and I think they will concede a lot of goals. The only hope is that stability of him being in charge will help, but that isn't a guarantee under a new ownership, or partly of a new ownership. Of course, it's not a full takeover, but in terms of Ineos, I mean, you could see a scenario where Ten Hag starts the season poorly and gets sacked. I mean, we see this consistently. They want to get their own guy in, which then ponders why they didn't do it at the end of the season. But we see that as a Chelsea fan, I can tell you, just because logically something sounds sane, it doesn't mean your club's going to do it. So Man United, for me, despite again having some technically good players, I still think that there's a good of a chance of it being a poor season for them. Maybe slightly better than last year, but I can't see it being significantly better than last year personally, because I still think there are some deep-rooted structural, technical, tactical problems that Ten Hag has that, if not solved, if not addressed in the transfer market, I think could cost Man United a lot. 7th, I've gone with Aston Villa. I think Champions League football, as it was for Newcastle, could be a massive strain on them. Yes, they have dealt with playing European football. They have dealt with that muscle memory of having to play every few days compared to, say, Newcastle. So it might not be a shock to the system, but it also is a massive step up in quality and competition. You can't exactly rotate like you can in the Europa Conference League, in the Europa League. So I think for Unai Emery, it's a big step. It's an exciting step. I still think, Ian Maatsen from Chelsea, I think is a really good signing, really smart signing. I think could prove to be a really good left back in a very short period of time. Ollie Watkins is still an amazing centre forward, and I think keeping him is obviously big. I think the signing of Onana from Everton is a really shrewd piece of business. I think he's a really exciting midfielder, and I think he's someone who's got a lot of attributes that I think if refined, I think in the right environment, he can go to another level. I just think as a box-to-box midfielder, he's exactly the type of player I could see thriving, especially because you've got John McGinn. You've got a lot of energy in that team. I think a very capable Premier League team under Unai Emery, who will be aiming to go a little bit further, but I just think the demand of Champions League football could hurt them. Not to say it will be a disastrous season, but I think it will maybe test the limits of their squad. I think they've got some very good players. It's just we expect a bit of that, especially if you're not one of the teams that plays in the Champions League regularly. Going to relegation, and I think the 3 teams getting relegated, 2 promoted teams are going down. Let's go firstly, 18th, I've put Everton. I just think Everton, they've lost again a big player in Onana. I think is a really good player, and losing him. But Everton are just a bit of a mess off the pitch. The takeover hasn't happened, and this may seem like unfair analysis, but I've seen this happen a number of times with Premier League teams who are constantly on the verge of getting relegated. Never quite happens, but they don't radically improve what they have, so they're always on the precipice of a bad run of form. As we saw last season, a points deduction, something going wrong that means they drop down into the Championship eventually. And I think Everton fall into that category. Ipswich, I want Ipswich to stay up. I think it'd be fun. I think Kieran McKenna obviously has done a wonderful job there. And from a Chelsea point of view, I want to see how Amari Hutchinson does. I think that's a brilliant signing. I think Leif Davis as a left back, I'm interested to see what he does in the Premier League this year, and how that team that has propelled themselves from League One to the Premier League so quickly does, and that positive momentum. But we saw with Luton last year, yes, I think Ipswich have a higher quality of player and of course bigger resources than Luton did, but there is just a big financial gap now between the Premier League and the Championship, and it's trying to get through that is such a big challenge for a number of teams. I mean, Nottingham Forest spent close to about 100 million in their first season after getting promoted and just stayed above the relegation zone. That shows you the financial difference now, and I think it's going to take a lot of McKenna and it's going to take a lot of those players. And I think using Portman Road as kind of an intimidating place is going to be their biggest kind of gift at times, a bit like Brentford have in recent years. You need to have something in your toolbox, despite having limited players, to be able to upset some of the biggest teams, to get those wins, to get those points on the board early, to prove that you can compete in some way and then hopefully build from that if you stay up. I don't think it's mission impossible, but I think it's going to be a big test for Kieran McKenna. So I think Ipswich will be, like with a lot of people, in the bottom three. I think Leicester are going to finish bottom. They've obviously lost Enzo Maresca, who was the coach who helped them get back up into the Premier League. But the points deduction and losing Dewsbury Hall too, I just think is going to be too much for them. I'm not entirely sure whether Steve Cooper, despite being, I think, a good coach, I think he is a very talented coach, whether he has enough in his locker and whether that club has enough in its locker to see off what could be an inevitable drop back down to the Championship. So it's how that goes. It's how losing a coach who was very much building something very precise, leaving so quickly, whether that has a real detrimental effect or whether Cooper can kind of build off of that, it is going to be the big test for him. So I've gone with those three teams. The final thing is just one to watch, and I think Fulham have had a really positive pre-season and transfer window. I think Emile Smith-Rowe from Arsenal is a really shrewd piece of business. Sessegnon as well coming in permanently. They did lose Paulinho and Tosin, but I do think Marco Silva has built something pretty sustainable there, and they've proven to be a very sure Premier League club. They seem like a club that know where they are in the Premier League, can hurt some teams across the course of a season, very solid, have some good individual players, hoping to build on that now with Emile Smith-Rowe. We'll see what happens with McTominay. I think if they get McTominay, it's a brilliant window, and I think for both Smith-Rowe and McTominay, it could be great new ventures for them in the first team at Fulham. But I think that they maybe are just in a position now where maybe they can push a little bit further and feel like with Brighton, with maybe in the case of Aston Villa, in the case of Newcastle, of course, bigger finances, but maybe feel that they can upset the apple cart, maybe even push for Europa Conference League play. So maybe that's a team I'd be looking at. Yes, Brighton had a difficult time of it last year, another coaching change. Can they upset people again? Can they prove to be kind of the hipster team and get some form of European football? But I'll go with Fulham. I think they may impress people this year. So that is it for my predictions. Let me know yours in the comments below. I know people will radically disagree, as they always do, but those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Follow me across the socials, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.